Okay, I'd like to call to order the meeting today for the San Rafael Local Agency Formation Commission. Today is November 2nd, 2017. And if you will roll call, please.
Commissioner Seves?
Here.
Commissioner Geyer?
Here.
Commissioner Hartman? Here. Commissioner Shkanian? Here. Commissioner Lavanino?
Here.
Commissioner Morehouse? Here. Commissioner Richardson?
Here.
Commissioner Stark?
Here.
Commissioner Waterfield?
Here.
Commissioner Welt?
Here.
Commissioner Wolf?
Here.
Let the record reflect that Commissioner Lavanino is in Santa Maria and all votes will be roll call.
Very good. Would you please all stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Mr. Richardson.
Place your hand over your heart and repeat with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, now is the time approval of minutes of the October 5th, 2017 meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move. Second.
Moved and seconded by Welt and Richardson. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Geyer?
Yes.
Commissioner Lavanino?
Aye.
Commissioner Morehouse?
Aye.
Commissioner Richardson?
Aye.
Commissioner Welt?
Aye.
Commissioner Wolf?
Aye.
Chair Seves?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, now is the time that we set aside for persons to address the commission on items not on today's agenda. Do we have any speaker slips?
Chair Seves and members of the commission, we have no request to speak on general public comment today.
Right. Consent calendar. We have 2 items on the consent calendar. Does any members of the commission wish to pull any of them?
I did have a question
On both?
on just one.
Okay, on item 1.
On
Go ahead and
Yeah.
read item 1 for the record.
Chair Seves and members of the commission, consent calendar item number 1 is to receive and file a report on disbursements for September and October 2017.
Thank you. Mr. Morehouse.
yeah, I just had a question on the near the bottom there, the 13,787 cost allocation charges. Is there a breakdown on that, or what? You want to explain that a little bit more?
The cost allocation charges are an annual expense. They're included in the budget, and they're billed quarterly. So the July through September cost allocation charge is what's reflected in this disbursement expenditure transaction sheet on the county's fin system.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? May I have a motion to approve both items in consent calendar 1 and 2?
So moved.
Moved by Wolf, second by Geyer. Roll call.
Commissioner Geyer?
Aye.
Commissioner Lavanino?
Aye.
Commissioner Morehouse?
Aye.
Commissioner Richardson? Aye. Commissioner Welt? Aye. Commissioner Wolf?
Aye.
Chair Seves?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Move on to business item 1, please.
Chair Seves and members of the commission, business item number 1 is to consider the 2016 through 2017 fiscal year billings from the county assessor and county elections and provide direction to staff.
Mr. Hood.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Paul Hood, LAFCO Executive Officer. This was presented to you at your last meeting, and I was directed to invite the county elections office, county assessor's office, and elections to respond to questions that you had about the billings for charges related to services that we requested that they provide to us. And these mainly had to do with checking signatures for registered voters, for mailings, checking landowner ownership, and for mailings as well, for notices. And in addition, for protest hearings for several proposals three main proposals that we had processed during the year in 16-17 were the West Santa Ynez annexation to the Santa Ynez Community Services District, the formation of the Cuyama Basin Water District, and formation of the Los Olivos Community Services District, which is a pending application that will be going to an election in January. So there was some hourly rates that were broken out by the assessor and elections in determining these charges that were sent to LAFCO in September. And they were based on the hourly rate and the hours that were spent on each proposal. And I was able to determine the hourly rate based on the total billing for the assessor's office and for elections. And thank you for providing that to me. Elections and the assessor were very helpful. So there was also some questions about some additional fees that were charged to us from that could not be determined, and the assessor's office and elections was able to break out more definitively some of these additional charges that, as you'll recall, they were unassigned last year, and they're reflected on this spreadsheet. And there was also charges for the Old Town Village annexation to the Goleta Sanitary District, the Curletti annexation, sphere of influence change to the Laguna County Sanitation District. So these are a couple of other proposals that we processed during the year, and we were charged for these. And the charges were made in September. They were posted on the FIN system on September 13th, and I paid the charges, authorized payment of the claim a couple of weeks later after I consulted with the assessor and elections to determine, how these charges were calculated. And this is the end result on the spreadsheet that I developed and that was updated by the county assessor's office and elections to reflect the new applications. I had some questions that I included in the staff report, and they had to deal with your interest in finding out more about the indirect cost rate that were applied to the LAFCO billings. And as I mentioned, the hours that could not be determined, these have now been broken out for you. And we did receive a billing in 2016-17 for charges that were much less, around $11,000 for billings in 15-16. And so these, the amount of money that was charged based on the proposals that we sent to the assessor and elections, that as an aside, that we could not calculate these, these services because they relate to registered voters and landowners. So we have to go through these two, the assessor and elections, so that we are clear on the protests that are filed, and particularly with the West Santa Ynez annexation, this was a very complicated situation for landowners to protest, and it came out to be within 0.3% of 25% protests, which 25 or greater or over 25 to 50% could have sent this matter to an election, and then the charges would at that point have been much higher because an election would be held, and based on the election, the annexation would go ahead or not go ahead. So I asked for the authority to what these claims were filed, and basically gave you the whole printout from the journal entry that was included, and also the hours that were spent by employee, and a certificate of indirect costs from the county auditor's office that the county auditor's staff is here to respond to. That for the assessor's office, the overhead rate was 75.2% added onto the staff costs, and for elections, it was 204%. So we were billed approximately $10,000 for the staff costs, and then $20,000 for county overhead on top of that. So that was something that your commission had questions on because it is kind of a large amount. And so we have Kyle Slattery from the auditor's office. Theo Filati is out of town unfortunately, as his deputy, Betsy Schaefer, is also gone today. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have, but I think you wanted to hear from the county assessor clerk office about how these costs are calculated and if there's any discretion in calculating indirect costs or county overhead and the billing rate that was charged. I think that's where I would, if I had to make a recommendation, that's where I'd kind of start out and hear from the experts. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hood. I think, first of all, if a commissioner has a question of Mr. Hood specifically, maybe we should ask that now.
Yeah.
And then what we'll do, maybe we'll just follow this chart. We'll talk about elections first, then assessors, questions from the commission, as we get our experts up to the podium. Mr. Geyer, you had a question?
Yeah, from Mr. Hood. Have the districts that are affected by this been notified?
They have been notified. I have not contacted the Guayama Basin Water District folks. The amount is much less, but the San Ynez CSD, I talked with the general manager and the Isla Vista Community Services District formation chief proponents have been notified.
Okay, and then also on this second chart that you gave us, a kind of a breakdown of the different things, I noticed the timing in especially the mapping and reporting, and when you get a report, I mean, some of these go for over a year before you get the report for it. Is that normal on an application?
Are you asking about mapping or just about the response time?
Well, the mapping, when the request went in and then when the report came back. Like the very first one was for LAFCO 1602. That took 11 months from the time you requested it to the time that you got the report back. One of them took 15 months to get the report back.
There were some issues with developing the maps from the county surveyor's office and the proponents that did take some time to process.
Because 1701 took 15 months, and I thought, thinking back, was that one of the reasons that we went with county mapping was because everything was up to date and we could get things in a timely fashion. But from these, it seems like a long time.
There were several iterations of the maps. That's probably the best explanation. That we do not process applications until, I've learned that we don't start out an application until the maps and legal descriptions are complete, because that generally takes a lot of time to do, especially with large areas. San Ynez was 400 plus acres and 400 homes. Guayama Basin Water District, you didn't ask about that, but that was, I think it was 18,000 acres. So that took some checking. And formation of the Los Olivos Community Services District, the maps had been developed by a private contractor and submitted and checked by the county surveyor's office. But that one should not have taken that long because we didn't actually get the application, I think, until January of 2017. But the others, go back about a year at least.
So your policy is that once you get it, you really don't deem the application complete until you have all the maps in hand.
Right.
So in these particular cases, it was 15 months minimum before the application was deemed complete.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at that, but I think that, I'm not sure it was 15 months, but I'd have to take a look at the billings. Okay.
Mr. Hood, on the screen there, you have to show $62,910.96. We paid that. Is that correct?
That's correct. We paid that. It was posted on the county's fin system on September 13th. And of course, that was after the budget was adopted and after the beginning of the fiscal year for 17-18. But it was paid within 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Okay, and now we're looking at these.
But it was posted in September.
And now we're looking at these different entities to basically pay us back.
That's correct.
Now, with regards to the IV district, I know it's only $404, but who's responsible for that? Are they responsible for that? Or actually is the county responsible for that?
For the billings?
for reimbursing us that $404.
I think the Isla Vista CSD would be responsible for any costs, because the county was the applicant.
Yeah, but they don't have any money.
Well, the county, again, was the applicant to form the district, so we would charge the applicant.
Okay. All right, Mr. Morehouse.
You were going down the road I was going down. And
Okay.
yeah, I thought that since the county's the applicant, they'd be the one that's paying it. So that bill just gets turned around and
Right.
sent back to the county to be paid.
Okay.
And my next question on that was, how do you intend to bill these entities for these charges?
Well, we would just send out an invoice like we do with applicants. You know, several times the Coyama Basin Water District was billed for additional costs. We had a special meeting that was charged to them. So I would send out an invoice and, you know, pay, when received, and they would do that.
Mr. Well.
Mr. Hood, can you refresh our memory on how the hourly rate was determined? For example, elections was $229, assessor was $134. Is that a question for them?
I think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, Mr. Lavanito, you have any questions for Mr. Hood before we get started?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's go to elections, because who's gonna represent the elections?
I'm Heather McCaslin, Division Manager for Elections. So about the rate, did you want to answer the question about the rate?
That's a good start.
Wes, did you want to speak to that?
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Wesley Welch. I'm the Fiscal Manager, Clerk Recorder, Assessor, and Elections. Basically, the rate you're looking at is a fully loaded rate, including the county overhead. In your Exhibit A, you have a labor summary from Elections. Their actual fully loaded rate for the Elections Division is $75.26. Once you add in the overhead, et cetera, that's when you're getting to that fully loaded rate. What he did is he took the complete charge, which includes overhead, and divided it by the number of hours that were allocated to that particular item.
Okay, many of the questions that we're going to ask today are just basically to educate us, but also educate our members as trying to figure out how and why these billings are taking, I mean, how they arrive to the numbers. My first question for you would be, I heard that the overhead's 200%. Is there an explanation of why we have a 200% overhead on the cost for services?
Good afternoon, Chair Zevis, members of the Commission. I'm Kyle Slattery from the County Auditor's Office. And a 200% rate is actually not entirely unusual. It just means a higher portion of the department's costs are indirect in nature as opposed to direct in nature. So any activity is going to have two cost components, your direct costs and your indirect costs. And the direct costs in this case are the labor hours incurred by the elections employees. The indirect costs are the portion of costs allocable to that activity, and that's really the cost of supporting and administering that activity that the staff was performing. So supervisors, department heads, utility charges, all those things which can't be directly assigned to that staff performing the activity, but should be assigned its allocable portion of it.
Okay, and where's the authority embedded in charging that 200%?
It's a full cost recovery. So as a county organization, we provide a service. There's going to be the direct cost of it, and it should include the full cost. And so that's why an indirect cost is included. And it's a very universally accepted method that the federal government actually sets the cost accounting principles that are followed in this case for determining the rate, determining which costs are allowable for inclusion in that rate, and then ultimately ensuring that that rate is reviewed and certified for use.
Okay, and my final question, I'll go to the commission, is the problem I'm having is that we get the bill late. We now have to convey to our, basically our members, our clients, that you got additional charges that weren't anticipated. Is there something we can do up front to identify perhaps the parameters of what the costs are going to be for the particular project that's being presented, so that at the end, if we find out that we're hitting that top end of what we estimated, that we can explain why we're going over, so now the client would understand why they're going to be charged extra money.
Certainly, I think through proactive communication and coming up with estimates for what the cost of a requested service would be, county departments would be happy to provide an estimate and inform the commission if there is anything that is potentially going to exceed that estimate. And then likewise, the commission may wish to inform the applicant of what that estimate is and when the charges are expected to come through.
Okay, but we don't do the estimates now, do we?
Not that I'm aware of. I think that when the service is requested would be an appropriate time to request an estimate, and then incorporate that into the annual budget process as well, so that you're ensuring that you're providing a source for this expenditure.
Okay. All right, commissioners. Mr. Guyer.
You said that for the overhead, you're reviewed, what, on an annual basis?
Absolutely, yeah. So the auditor's office reviews the indirect cost rate on an annual basis. It's not a quick scan or anything. It's a very thorough review. We have, a packet of support where we've tied out every single cost, compared that to the federal cost principles to ensure that it's allowable, tested the methodology to ensure that it's clerically accurate and performing the intended function, and then ultimately certifying that rate so that the assessor can use it in its external billings.
So it's something that you have available annually. Couldn't you broadcast that out to departments, to LAFCO, so that we have an idea that we're, when we establish an approximate time when we get an application of how long it's going to take. So we could look at it and say, okay, it's going to take this many hours for this department, and their fully loaded cost is this much. I mean, if you communicated that to LAFCO, that would help, I think, our executive officer be able to give a more accurate estimate. And then the other question I have is, I got to kind of think of how to say it. Do you charge this fully loaded rate to the public when they come in and ask for something?
Absolutely. So when we have external fees to the public, that would be the fully included full cost of providing that service. And it would include an indirect cost rate, just as this does, in order to capture that full cost.
Wow. Thank you.
Mr. Richardson.
My question's regarding the estimate. Is that estimate time to give us the estimate? Will that be billed against us also?
That would be probably a fiscal activity that the department's fiscal manager would perform, and that's an indirect activity, meaning they may be doing lots of estimates throughout the year, and you can't assign it to one given activity, or it may not be a significant portion of their time. So that's an example of an indirect cost which needs to be recovered through the billing.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Mr. Well.
Thank you for being here. This is a real important conversation for us. We were a little bit blindsided when it came our way. In reference to the 200% fully loaded, does everybody get charged that, all departments?
Every single department has their own indirect cost rate. So this is an example of one where the majority of this department's costs for this activity are indirect in nature. So if it's 200%, that means for every dollar of direct activities performed, there's $2 of indirect costs associated with that. That varies for every department based on the way they're organized, based on their cost structure as well.
Can you give us a range from the top to the bottom on what departments are charged?
Well, certainly. There's ranges at the low end would be just in excess of 10%, and then there's ones that are in excess of 200%. So it really.
How do we get in line for 10%?
That would be an activity that is primarily direct, performing direct activities. And so maybe there's planning and development. They're always working on permits, and they're directly working on permits, and there's maybe only a few staff supporting that activity. That's an example of one that would have a high percentage of direct cost. For elections, there may not be that many direct activities during the year, so the remainder of their costs would be indirect in nature.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Lavany, let's stand by. It's Mr. Morehouse and then you.
When, when did this type of billing begin and start sending to departments, including LAFCO? Is this the first year that you've done this to us?
My understanding is that this is not the first year that services have been provided and a billing has occurred. It does occur, though, that there was a higher volume of services provided this year and therefore a higher cost.
Yeah, because I don't recall seeing these in the past, and especially at this level. And you said you came up with 200%. That, to me, that kind of, you know, for every dollar, it's $2. That seems kind of arbitrary. Doesn't seem like there was a formula. It was more of a guesstimate.
It's a very closely calculated formula.
And you came up with 200.
It's 204% in this
Okay.
case. I was rounding.
Okay, so it's more than 200. It's 204%. Okay. That makes it not as suspicious. So now everybody who wants to have an election has to pay for it. Is that basically what you're saying? Anybody that wants to have an election has to pay some cost to that election. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, could I jump in?
Yes.
Most of this was not, actually there were no elections as part of this except for the Coyama Basin Water District. That's the only one that went to an election. But the costs are necessary, the services are necessary in determining registered voters for mailings within the boundaries of a proposed annexation or new district. Landowners for the purposes of mailings, and we have to mail not only to the landowners, registered voters within the boundaries, but within 300 feet of the boundaries, and also for protest hearings, where we had protest hearings for all three of these major proposals, the West San Ynez annexation, the Coyama Basin Water District, and the formation of the Los Olivos CSD. So those are all protest hearings. And again, when we receive protests that are filed before the end of the protest hearing, they need to be checked to make sure that they are valid protests. They need to go to the assessor's office for landowner protests. They need to go to county elections for registered voter protests. And I asked the question on occasion that, well, we just did a mailing 2 weeks ago. Why can't we just use that list? And the response is, and logically it's correct, is that registered voters change on a daily basis. People leave the area, people come into the area, go into the elections office and register to vote or drop from the voter registration list. And landowners change because, you know, there are sales, there are people that, you know, buy new property, there's new construction. There would be, you know, and that was the case in the West San Ynez annexation, determining who was a landowner. And Bill and legal counsel and myself and the assessor's office spent a lot of time going through that because, you know, is it in a trust? Is it owned by more than one person? Is it a joint tenancy that's owned by a man and wife? There are variations on that that could really completely change the process, because when you come down to 0.3% difference between, you know, 24.7 and 25%, it can mean the difference between, like you said, going to an election to determine if the protest is valid. And in the case of the Los Olivos CSD, going to an election that will be held on January 30th, that will be charged, the election itself would be charged to the new district if it is successful. But if it's not successful, it would be charged, the county would absorb the cost. And this is not something that the county bills in its budget, you know, holding an election, because you can't tell, you know, at the beginning of the year if there's going to be an election, if there's not going to be an election. And some of this is related to LAFCO approving new districts and annexation. So I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, to follow up on that, some of the information you just provided was information that you and Bill do, and that's not what we're here questioning. You said that you had to go through trusts and see who's part of the trust and stuff like that. So it seems to me that a landowner is a landowner or a voter is a voter, and I would assume that should be fairly automated at this point in time, and it should be more efficient than, I'm looking at $29,000 for the West San Ynez. $29,000. I mean, that's a lot, and I understand that you guys, the two of you, have done work on this, but that's not what we're questioning.
Right.
Questioning the billing from the county or
Right,
for the
exactly.
assessor's office.
Yeah, we
or
work
the
with-
elections.
Excuse me. We work with the assessor's office and county elections to, make sure that they're following the process, that they are valid in determining the protests and for notice purposes, because the last thing you want to do is not notice everyone on an annexation or formation of a district. And we're very adamant that we need to do full notice. We had some situations in West San Ynez where people were complaining they didn't know about the annexation moving ahead, so we're very adamant that we want to do an accurate mailing and an accurate determination of registered voters and landowners. And the assessor and elections can talk to that more specifically.
And so what you said is some of the time spent, like on the West San Ynez, the 29,000, some of that you were working with the assessor's office and determining you were there physically working, or you were basically billing hours. And so do we have your billable hours that would go next to that 29,000 that we'd also have to add on to send to
we're
San Ynez?
not billing hours. My rate is basically I get paid regardless of how much time and effort I put into, and Bill has a contract that he bills. But we don't work with them except to explain to them what we need, and they do the actual physical, on-site checking. And how they do that, I'm not sure, but they can probably clarify that. We don't go and double check what they present to us.
Mr. Lavanino.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to Commissioner Welt's question and clarify something from our staff there. So I think what was kind of getting confusing is, just to clarify, you don't charge different departments or customers a different rate like out of elections. And I think that's what it was coming across as. What you're telling us is different departments have different rates. And so the department that we're dealing with is elections, and they have a higher indirect cost. But it's not like elections will charge 10% to one customer and 200 to another. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I think that was kind of getting lost in the shuffle a little bit.
Mr. Guyer.
Well, we beat this thing up pretty good, but one thing that I'm concerned about is, first off, how do you carry on your billing from one fiscal year to close off one fiscal year and jump into another fiscal year? Some of these go back into 2015. And that, what we're provided here is a LAFCO file number, and that may be the application time. So the work may have been requested in 2016, but we still at least jump from 16 to 17. So we're being billed in 2017 for work that was actually done in 2016. And no matter how you cut this, to try to give a logical explanation to Los Olivos Community Service District or San Ynez Community Service District, they don't want to hear it. These people have already passed a budget. They're halfway through a budget year, and we come and hand them a bill for 30 grand. That is not how business should be done. It blows my mind.
Okay, Commissioner Hartman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we discussed this at our last meeting, we asked, and I believe we got an answer to the question of when this full cost recovery went into effect. I believe we were told that this was relatively recent, but we're hearing today that it's been the policy. So it brings me to my major question, which is notice. This was a huge surprise to us, and it's an even bigger surprise to others. And I think that's really untenable after the fact, especially for districts that don't exist, to spring this on them. I can't get my mind around that. So can you elaborate when the full cost recovery and what kind of notice has been provided both to LAFCO and how has this worked in the past? You could never do this to people, just spring it at the last minute.
The county's full cost recovery policy has been in effect since 1982. So the full cost recovery nature of it is something that's been in business for quite some time. Again, I'm from the auditor's office, so I don't speak to the billing practices of a department. And so I would defer to the clerk recorder regarding the timing of billings and communication between the commission and the department in terms of what the expectation for those billings is, and then the communication back to the applicant.
Does somebody want to respond to that question as far as the billing?
And may I just follow up?
Okay, I'm sorry.
While I have
I
the
just
mic?
wanted to get your question
Sure,
answered.
absolutely. Thank you, and I appreciate that. But it's, going forward for the Los Olivos CSD, for the IV CSD, what are their costs going to be, and how are we going to let them know, and how can they accommodate that?
I believe that when the service is requested, an estimate could be provided by the department, and that estimate would include the rate of the employee that's going to provide the service, and then the indirect cost rate that's been approved for use in that year. And that would provide a fair and reasonable estimate of what the cost of the service may end up being. Of course, actual experience may be different.
Okay, can we address the billing question? I think that'll help fill in the gap here.
Yes, sir. The billing is done on a fiscal year basis. That's why it would roll over 2 calendar years. So this particular bill was for fiscal year 16-17 that ran through June 30th of 2017. So there was any item that started July 1st of 2016 through June 30th of 2017 was picked up on the billing.
Okay, my question then is, how do you notify the client that they have a clock running and at the end of the fiscal year they're going to get this bill? I mean, how do we notify the agencies that are before us that they've got an impending debt that the county is going to address at the end of their fiscal year?
I believe if you look at the LAFCO fee sheet, you guys do indicate to the entities, the applicants, that they do need to put down a deposit, and they will be responsible for any fees that are above and beyond the deposit they put down. You do list in your fee sheet the cost of the assessor and the elections divisions. As far as delineating the number of hours we're going to have to spend on any application, that might be something, either elections or mapping. It depends on the complexity of the question that's asked of us.
I am Keith Taylor, Chief Deputy Assessor. It is hard to estimate the time it will take, because once we get the request for a report back, we go through that application to make sure it's complete, and we have 30 days to respond on that. Sometimes we found out, especially in a few of these projects last year, there was some incomplete legal descriptions or not accurate information that came to us, and we had to go back and forth between the assessor's office, our mapping section, and Mr. Hood to get that information. So if we were able to receive stuff more complete, I can estimate our time would be less, but we don't really know until we get the application what we're looking at and how we need to respond to it.
And as noted, our fee schedule is something that we're going to have to address to make sure that we're capturing a realistic number. So as they come before us, they're not shocked and we're not shocked. Okay, Mr. Stark.
Yes, I'm sorry. It occurs to me that the critical thing here is that the people who are applying for the formation applications are aware of the range of costs that they are likely to be responsible for, which leads me to ask 2 questions. The first, and if you can't see me chuckle, I'm chuckling on the inside, is whether there is a succinct explanation of the cost recovery system and how it is likely to affect an applicant in a couple paragraphs that says, here's what it is, here's, how we estimate it, and here's what you can expect. And the second thing I think what our chair said is how do we integrate it into our policies and rules so that when somebody applies, they're aware and on notice that they're going to get hit with a cost allocation bill of some uncertain amount. It seems that that's what we owe the applying public is a fair, reasonable notice and explanation. I wonder if the auditor's got something in their back pocket that'll do that.
As Wes had mentioned, I believe that the only documentation I've seen regarding the billing practices of the commission are outlined in the fee schedule that the commission adopts biannually. And I think the most recent one was done effective as of 7/1/17 and includes some language which says, hey, a deposit will be put down, and then when actual costs are actually determined, you'll be billed for the difference or refunded. And that's a fairly common practice in governments because we don't know up front what the cost is going to be.
I agree, but with transparency, we're going to have to work closer together to make sure that we're letting them know exactly what they're looking at. Commissioner Scanian.
But I'm thinking of people who are applying, thank you, for applying for these annexations and the CSDs. These costs are so high that might affect whether they want to follow through or not. And that is what I think we're all concerned about, isn't it? That, you can get hot under the collar over something or want to annex some juicy parcel, and then you realize it costs more to do it than you will gain back. And so it's and I was wondering about the budget book. The county used to have a very detailed budget book in a place where you could find this information and you could point to it. But the last few years, the budget book has been very truncated, shall I say, and each department not stating real clearly things, essay form, and then just 3 pages of numbers, no bottom line. And where is it? You say you're providing a fee schedule, biannually. That should be handed out right up front the first time a person applies, so they know what they're getting into. That's all. That's what's concerning everyone, isn't it? They don't even know, they have any idea of these costs, and here we are in the middle, so we'd better fix that. Yeah.
That's why at the end of the day, we're going to have to put that together to make sense, because right now it doesn't.
And the county should have something in writing that's important looking and permanent, which they have lost with the quality of their budget book since, when was the last good one, 2013 or so. And I mean, that's somewhere where you could point to and say, this is how it is. This is our policy. And that's what's surprising everyone. I have a question.
Commissioner Geyer, then Wolf.
Well, I think that the full cost recovery issue, I'm thinking back 6 or 7 years ago when our previous executive officers were here, and we formed a budget committee. And I was aware that their office made us aware of the full cost recovery even at that time. For me, what I really see, I think that we have a decent policy in explaining that there could be additional costs. Maybe we should review that and update it, expand it a little bit. But for me, I think the biggest thing going forward is communication between the auditor controller and our executive officer at least once a year to get a handle on what your full cost recovery is for these 2 departments, because that's the ones that we use the most.
Okay, Commissioner Wolf and then Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what I understand as part of this issue is that we didn't budget for this. And so Mr. Hood, is it that that there were more items that came to us that we didn't expect, that it took more time that we didn't expect, or that the cost was so far out of line?
Well, just by way of comment, it really gets down to what type of applications I'm learning this now, are filed, and that we request information from the assessor from elections. And these proposals, the West San Ynez annexation, Coyama Basin Water District, and Los Olivos, are, containing, 1,000 people, approximately for both of those, many more maybe for the Coyama Water District. And to be quite honest with you, when I prepared the budget and it was approved back in May of 2017, I did not anticipate this type of billing. And I did not anticipate it until September 13th, well into the new fiscal year, when I received a claim in my inbox for this amount, for $62,000. So I think it would be helpful to me when I'm developing the budget if, sometime in the last quarter of the fiscal year, when I'm, determining how much money I need to put in the budget, that someone from the assessor, from elections and from the auditor lets me know that looks like it's going to be 50,000, looks like it's going to be 20,000, it's going to be 80,000, so that I can at least put it in so I can pay the bill. Now, fortunately, the bill came in September, so we're not really into the fiscal year. There's funds in the professional and special services account that would cover later costs that we would be billed for different matters. But to help me anticipate, it would be helpful, rather than getting a bill in September, if I would know, towards the last quarter of the fiscal year, well, you could be faced with this amount. Now, if we turn around and bill the applicant, then, or the community in Los Olivos situation, I would need to let them know that they can expect some bills, based on the amount of work that LAFCO has authorized be performed, that we would be billed and would need to pay, so that we would pass the cost along to them. But when I called San Ynez and Los Osos proponents, it was kind of say, I just found out about this and I didn't have a clue that this, is an unanticipated expense that we were going to need to pass along. Last fiscal year, 15-16, we were billed about 11,000. And I paid that because I didn't think that that was unreasonable, based on the amount of our budget. But 62,000 billing is about 10 or 12% of our total budget. We don't have a large budget.
Well, and I think that's, I think you've answered a lot of the questions. I think it starts with our budgeting. And I think, meeting with staff is a good thing. You never know exactly what's coming down the pike, but I think will have a good idea. And so that money, or that line item, should be increased basically based on what you see coming. And going to our policy, there's been a lot of work that has been done on all of these issues. I think you even said that. A lot of time and effort because of the complexity. And our policy states that you put down a deposit, and if it's more, then people will have to pay it. I do believe that some guidelines is sometimes appropriate. But I know, and probably all of us know, that when we run for election, and we want to put a little blurb in the election packet, we pay a deposit to elections, and we're told that depending on the number of, Mr. Holland knows this better than me, I can't remember, but it's either the number of candidates who file or something to that effect, we may either have to pay more or we may get some of the money back. So I think any one of our applicants, and it sounds like our policy does cover that they're made aware that they put down a deposit, but it could be more. And I think that we should be billing all of these folks for the services that have been provided. And going forward, doing what you had suggested, and that is getting a better idea of what the cost will be so that we're not surprised at the end. So anyway, I want to thank staff for coming and presenting this information, and it's obviously a good thing for us to know. Thank you.
I just want to clarify a response to Commissioner Wolf, and I'll go to the commissioners. My lights are like Christmas trees right here, so I'll get to you in just a second. I think the problem is that we got billed at the end, and we didn't notify the different applications that they were going to be charged this. We paid the bill out of our account, and now we have to get reimbursed. So I guess the system has to change so that there's a billing or notification ahead of that big bill coming to us, so that we can go to them and charge them and make sure that we have their money to pay you your money. Does that make sense?
Or we ask for a larger deposit up front.
Well,
If we have an idea of what the cost will be, which I don't think we know that, we might say up front, give us a larger deposit, rather than doing it at the end. But I do see what you're saying.
I think it may be a balance of both. Mr. Richardson?
Did I understand you to say that your billing is an annual billing?
No, sir, it's a fiscal year basis.
It's for fiscal billing.
Yes, sir.
Is there any reason that you can't increase the frequency of that billing so that the numbers aren't as large, so that we can bill on a more frequent basis to our applicants?
I don't think there would be an issue with that. That would be something you could direct us to do, and I wouldn't have a problem submitting you a JE.
I think that would be a good solution to the problem, is more frequent billing, and then we can, if we can bill the applicant on the completion of the application, and then any billing that follows after that, it'll be smaller bites to take out of their budgets and ours also. So I'm requesting that the commission go to that idea, to a more frequent billing, whether it be quarterly or monthly.
Okay, Mr. Geyer, then Mr. Morehouse.
Yeah, I think at some point at our budget time, it would be a form of a discussion for this, because I can see changing, reviewing, and adjusting the deposits for certain types of applications. But to include an increase in a line item in our budget to accommodate costs for applications, you're asking every participant in LAFCO to subsidize that, and that shouldn't happen. So I think that at some point we need to review certain types of applications. CSDs seem to kind of jump off the page, that you know, our estimates and the amount of the deposit for those two types of applications need review. We need to understand that deposit for that type of an application needs to change. But to ask everybody to participate in a line item of a budget for applications, I don't think that's fair.
Mr. Morehouse.
Yeah, I'd like to expand a little bit on Commissioner Richardson's comments. You know, we're being asked to be the bank, and we need to change that. And I don't see why those items there can't be listed in the government, in the county's books as accounts receivable, and then provide us the bill, and we bill the people, and when we receive it, we pass it through back to the county, and you can wipe that bill off there. And you're asking us to pay it up front and collect it, whereas I think a more efficient way would be just for you to list it as an account receivable, and when we receive the money, you'll receive the money. Would it work?
Okay. Do we have any other input? Does this make sense as far as getting a billing sooner to make sure that we're able to compare that we have sufficient deposits on hand to pay the anticipated expenses? Because if we don't, we have to go back to the proposers. And like many cities do, if we have a planning project, if the deposits run out, their project stops. And that prevents us from going in the hole for somebody else's project. But can we do a regular notification to our executive to let them know that the deposits, because you know what we're taking for deposits, is there a way you can notify them in a timely fashion that this entity is close to exceeding the deposits on hand because of this activity, and present a bill?
I would certainly be able to let them know the billing that we would provide for our services. I unfortunately don't know what else you bill them out for. So I wouldn't have any idea as far as that was concerned. But I could certainly, if we want to set up a quarterly, type of JE process, I can certainly do that. I can work with Mr. Hood with his budget. When we're doing estimated actuals for the budget process, I can certainly run reports for him at that point and let him know, the number of hours that we have expended up to that point. And then based on what he has left outstanding, he can look and say, well, it looks like we're going to need X more hours, and he can adjust his budget accordingly.
And do you use the same project code that we use, or are we talking to each other?
So our staff codes to a project code LAF, and I run a fin report for that particular project code, and it basically gives me a summary of all the hours that we've spent working on LAFCO items.
But it's not broken down by project?
No, sir. The individual employees are keeping track of what they're working on. And we're also going to do a better job on our record keeping as far as that goes too, because sometimes they may be working on 2 projects at the same time, and we need to more clearly delineate that.
Because here is the problem. Last time we talked about this, there was a bunch of money that we couldn't account for. I mean, a project that we
64.5 hours. That's correct.
That we didn't know what was charged for.
We had our mapper go back and look through his emails, et cetera, to determine what exactly he was working on. We had actually printed out time cards so we knew what hours he worked on what day that he coded to LAFCO, and then he went back and cross-referenced his emails, et cetera, to determine what he was working on at that time.
Can we fix that moving forward so that we know what he's working on, so we know who we're charging it to, so that we can compare that budget, that deposit?
Yes, through our time card system, they will be putting comments on what projects they're working. Now, we don't have individual LAFCO projects within our time card coding system at this time. They just code to LAF.
But can they identify the project? If it's LAF Los Olivos, then Mr.
Currently, we're not set up that way. They put a comment in the time card system that said, I worked 3 hours on Tuesday, and this was for 16:02.
We need to be able to break it down to each entity. So, Mr. Hood and you guys are going to need to work together. And I see, and maybe in summation, unless somebody else has another thought, I think there's 2 things we need to fix. We need to fix that communication as to what we're being charged for, so that we know that we have adequate deposits on file. Because if we don't, obviously, we either stop or we get more money. The second part is relooking at our deposit structure to make sure that it is now appropriate given the increased cost for services, so that we also have enough deposits up front. Anybody else have any opinion on that? Mr. Geyer. I knew you would.
Yeah, no, I'll make one last pitch. Over the years, over at least the last 3 or 4 years, I've been vocal about our fee structure. And what I really see is our fees, and when I brought it up, I kind of got chastised for charging too heavy of a fees. But I think our fee structure really does need to be looked at so that at least the hours that we have in it accommodate this full cost recovery, because right now I can definitely see that it does not do that. So,
Mr. Richardson,
you gave 2 suggestions. The offer of more frequent billing ought to be really considered. And when you open a project with elections, and to tag, put a hyphen after it to indicate the project we're doing with, and then you can sort on that and have 2 or 3 entries, LAF dash something, LAF dash something. Something that's identify each project individually, then you can build toward that. And plus on a monthly or quarterly basis, so that we're aware of it. Then I see, if we get those billings, that when an application is complete, we can bill at that point, because we have all those numbers at that point, and then we can bill any increases after that time.
Okay.
Thank you.
On Mr. Geyer's comment, Mr. Hood, I think I think it'd be appropriate if we look at what costs we are absorbing through the projects. Mr. Dillon's, is a contract that we have to pay for, but if it should be charged to a project, it's something that we should be looking at. So as we go through the fee structure, as we go through this whole system, I think that piece needs to be included. Okay, I think we're done. Does anybody else, Mr. Holland, did you have anything you want to say? You spent the whole afternoon with us, and
well, thanks for having us. Just would like to say that this was unusual. We've had many years where we haven't billed LAFCO at all, just because we didn't spend much time on anything.
Can we go back to that?
Yeah. And then a lot of the years it was between $5,000 and $10,000. And so this was a very unusual year, and I do think it is a good idea to bill more frequently. We'll know that if we're doing a land-based election type thing like this, they're very time consuming. We have not done those in the past. And so we were on a learning curve here, and we'll bill more frequently. We'll set up codes to keep track of the projects, and we'll keep in better communication on these things going forward.
Maybe you'll put us in that 10% bracket?
I have to take orders from the auditor's office on that.
I want to thank everyone for joining us today. It's been very informative. I think I personally learned a lot, but I think we have a lot of work to do, so looking forward to it. Let's take a 5-minute break before we make to the next. I'm sorry. Oh, did we have any public comment on this?
Chair Seves, members of the commission.
Can I speak? I wasn't going to.
Because I didn't see any slips. Come on forward. Just give your name for the record.
I'm Lisa Palmer, Los Olivos. I've been part of the district formation process, and we're the dubious guinea pig or in the jet wash of this experience here. So it's been a good constructive discussion today. I would encourage you to remember that it's an applicant has a decision in this process too, that if you say it's going to be another $22,000, that there is an opportunity to say, yes, we want to go forward, or no, we don't, or we need more time. So from our perspective, we are unique in that we are not formed. So right now, we have 3 individuals who took the effort to get this process going, who are on the hook for $22,000. And we have no interest in passing that on to a newly formed district should it be formed. And that amount is about the cost of holding the election. I mean, that's pushing $50,000 that we would come into existence in debt with. So we're not interested in doing that. Mr. Hood has agreed to give us a full accounting of what we've already paid because we put down our deposit. We have paid the county for surveying work. We're putting together all of our expenses that we've paid for and get all that information and see where we are, and ideally see what we can figure out or come to some agreement with. There's $22,000 in expenses we didn't let you know might be coming. Here it is, it's rolled downhill, and this is where it stops. Have a nice day. Doesn't really sit well all the way around. So I'm glad for the discussion here that you can fix that problem going forward. Unfortunately, we're stuck with the problem right now. So I would ask for your understanding, and as we continue this process, to figure out how we can come to some resolution there. So thank you.
Thank you. We were as shocked as you were, believe us.
Pardon me?
We were as shocked as you were.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because that was obviously not anticipated. So anyway, we'll do our homework and put our numbers together, and then send that back to Mr. Hood, and we'll see where we go from there.
Great. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. Okay, I'd like to call the meeting back to order. And we're down to informational item number 1.
Chair Seves and members of the Commission, informational item number 1 is to consider a report on the 2017 LAFCO Annual Conference in San Diego, October 25th, 2017 through October 27th, 2017.
Mr. Hood.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's really a pleasure to talk about the conference that we just attended last month and last week. It seems like a month ago. But we were in San Diego, and we had a good turnout from Santa Barbara LAFCO, from commissioners and your staff and legal counsel both attended. And I would encourage any commissioners that have comments on the program, I'll go through it briefly, but I know some of you took notes and could mention some of the high points and not so high points about the conference. Train trip was fun. We had very long, but it was fun watching cars sit on the freeway as we went by at 65 miles an hour and from the air. Started out with the first day, Wednesday morning mobile workshop that several of us attended. And we went to, we assembled at 7 a.m. On Wednesday, but we did go to the Carlsbad desalination plant and the Encina power plant, suppliers of electricity and water to the San Diego region. It was very informative and took a little while to get there on the freeway, but when we made it, power plant particularly was very interesting. And we weren't informed, we were, I guess, at some point that it was 5 flights up on stairs to go up to the top level. And you have the option of taking the elevator, but one of the commissioners informed me that I needed to go up the stairway. So we'll have some comments on that later. But it was very interesting. They're taking the power plant offline, so we looked at something that's not going to be around for much longer, but they're building a new power plant across the highway. And the desal plant is, as you know, one of the largest advanced desal plants in the nation. And so that was also very informative, and how that functions and how that works and supplies, blending water with, current water supply was very interesting. So if any commissioners have any comments on it that attended the workshop, now would be a good time to mention that. I think it was.
Mr. Dillon, do you have any comments on your class that you went to?
The attorneys' meeting. The attorneys' meeting was very productive. Our usual complaint is that we wish it was a little bit longer, but we had a good turnout and covered a lot of cases. So it's that and the staff workshop, which we do sort of the other half of the year. Usually there's just a lot of very good information from lawyers who practice law in a field that's very obscure. So it's always valuable.
Mr. Richardson.
I want to say that the overall conference was good. With an buffet dinners weren't all that wonderful. But what I want to do is emphasize the LAFCO 101 program that those who took the mobile workshop missed. It was very thorough and very complete and enlightened me somewhat. The other thing was one of the sessions, there was an issue on branding of LAFCO to emphasize the brand. And while the discussion was going on, I was trying to form some thoughts, and they ended the discussion before I had them all together. So I'm going to tell you what my thoughts were now. They did a man-in-the-street interview asking people what LAFCO was. They got all kinds of answers ranging from a clown college to other things. And I see that the reason for the ability to identify what LAFCO does is in its name. Local Agency Formation Commission. Is that a military organization, formations? Agency, is that an outfit, a PR outfit that advises the entertainment industry? And local, what does that mean? Is that state, city, county? So I'm in favor of, and it's going to probably be a legislative move to get the name changed, but I'm in favor of trying to find a name that really represents what we do, because when people ask me about LAFCO, I have to give them examples of what we do. It should be in the name. Example, SBCAG is Association of Governments, we know that. APCD, we know that's air pollution. And CSD, we know what that means. I would like to ask our Cal LAFCO representative to bring that issue up, or Paul to bring that issue up at a Cal LAFCO meeting to see if there's a effort that we can make that would change the name of LAFCO that would point out exactly what we do. And if you can tell me what that is without an example, I would appreciate that for myself. Thank you.
Anybody else, Mr. Stark?
I have some comments about the conference, not particularly about renaming LAFCOs. It's a poor acronym that when you decipher it, you can't tell what the acronym stood for. In any event, I thought the conference was pretty good. I thought there was substance. I agree with Commissioner Richardson about the utility of the Cal LAFCO 101. My arthritic ankles was not even close to the 5 flights of stairs. I think that I had one item that I think it's worth it for us to consider, and I'm actually surprised at myself. I think that we would be profitable to explore getting a Facebook page if we can do so without too much effort and any additional money, and the reason for doing that is pretty simple. I can't remember who was the branding thing or something else, but this statistic was offered that Facebook is where the majority of people get their information from about a whole lot of things. So if we simply export our website into a Facebook page, we might get a better communicative product for not a lot of money. I think maybe we could do a little nosing around and figure out whether that's feasible or not. I learned 3 interesting things at the LAFCO conference, which I think would be worthwhile to share. The first thing I learned was during this excellent panel presentation on fiscal pain. It was a very good panel presentation with knowledgeable people. The first thing I learned is that what we had been told about the time limits and the timing for entities to recover from their unfunded pension liabilities was, in the view of these experts, substantially longer than what we had been told to believe. We had been told it was going to be a 10-year effort, and what I can gather from those folks, it's 10 years of pain, another 10 years of plateau, and then after about 20 years is when people can recover. I thought that's useful for folks to know. The second thing is that there are a whole lot, or a lot, of measures of financial sustainability of organizations. I did a 2-minute web search, and I found a pretty decent set for both nonprofits and, curiously enough, for local governments. They're about measures of financial sustainability, which would be a good thing to put out there. And I think it'd be good for people to know, what are the characteristics that entities use to make sure they're profitable in the future. The third thing is I got a pretty clear picture of the Cannabis Coalition versus City of Upland case, to the point where you can now determine that there is a credible, well thought out theory for both that the court left the 2/3 voter requirement intact, and for the proposition, you can read that, for majority voter approval for initiatives. Respectable opinions, which leads, I think, just about everybody who's looked at it to conclude the only thing that's going to give you clarity is one of 2 things. One is a court decision, a subsequent court decision, or 2 would be a constitutional amendment that's approved on the ballot. So if anyone is interested, I've got the opinion, the legal opinions and the measures. I'll give them to Paul, and you can look at it. But it's kind of interesting. You can expect chaos in the future on that front.
Mr. Welch.
Thank you. Just a couple of casual observations. It was interesting to me in the very first session that we had a consultant talk to us about his results of polling 1,000 registered voters in the state of California. And the question that he asked the 1,000 folks was, what do you see as the main problems facing the state of California? And up at the very top, it was housing and homelessness. And then down at the very bottom was water. And I thought, man, 12 months makes a huge difference on water. And I thought, okay, who are these 1,000 people that he was sampling? And then in the second session, there was a video about LAFCO. And this is the session where they interviewed the man on the street. And there were several little vignettes, and actually nobody had a clue what LAFCO was. And so that's when there was some discussion about, how do you fix that? And maybe social media might be an opportunity to take advantage of. And then that consultant also said, look at what other LAFCOs are doing. Steal the ideas from other LAFCOs. Also, the business meeting the following day, there was some discussion about the Little Hoover Commission. And I thought that was interesting discussion. Cal LAFCO has done a lot of work legislatively, and they were pleased with the outcome, with Little Hoover saying that they support local communities not interfering with the work of LAFCO. And we've had some run-ins with that in the past, so that was very apropos for us. And then also there was some discussion about the legislature granting, I think was it $1 million for every LAFCO, every county, all 58 counties, to do some special projects. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. So it was a good conference. I wasn't too excited about the facility. The second morning I got up and I stepped on a huge cockroach. So it was good. Lots of good education, a lot of networking, and very worthwhile. Yeah, we had spiders.
Okay, any other commissioner that want? Ms. Gannon, you want to talk about your experience? And
No, I just had a comment. I think the poll was taken in Northern California.
Yeah.
You can interview men and women on the street and get anything you want through editing, of course. The people who want LAFCO will find out what LAFCO is. It's just like if you have your foot hurts, you find out what a podiatrist is, So that didn't bother me too much, but I really enjoyed the branding talk. And I left it home, but I'm going to bring it next time. I grabbed a whole bunch of her worksheets. It was great in the insert. Some of you may have gotten some, but I took a whole bunch to hand out to people who didn't go to the conference, so you might enjoy that, just to see what would be practical for us to do. I agreed with Shane mostly. All of us like the 101 so much. It's just like a review session with really sharp people leading it. And I also like the fiscal information in the same one that Shane talked about, but I guess I heard it from different ears, especially the feasibility of cities and the population you need to sustain a city. And a lot of people think they want to incorporate with too few people, and I've experienced that and know how foolish that is, and I scribbled down a lot of information about that for my own use, my local community. So, yeah, it was good, and I agree that I thought the Santa Barbara Cal LAFCO meeting was good because it was all on site, so people could go up and rest, refresh, come back, instead of going 2 miles, to the other hotel and back, and that it's better to have it all on one site. That is one thing I observed, for whatever it's worth. Thank you.
Commissioner Richardson.
There was one very important thing that I think we're overlooking that was announced at that meeting. The board, by a close margin, determined that Cal LAFCO was not a lobbying organization. It's not an legislatively advocating organization. They indicated that will be an outreach or an education informing organization, but we won't be lobbying the legislature for bills, which kind of, to me, weakens the organization. If we have an organization that's going to support LAFCO and its goals and aims, we ought to have an influence on the legislature. That no longer exists. So I think we ought to keep that in the back of our minds.
Mr. Morehouse.
Yeah, and just follow up a little bit on that one. Yeah, they chose to remain a 501c3. You know, there's many different ways to be a 501c, and Cal LAFCO is under subdivision 3, which is an educational, et al., a few other things. And they voted to remain that way because once you change that nonprofit status, a lot does change. But they do seem, they are still political, and they still get involved in some of the issues and use other entities to get that message out. They teamed up with CSDA, and that was very evident at the conference that they talked about the Little Hoover Commission and how they teamed up with CSDA, and they do leverage the relationship with that organization to address bills that could affect us. So I don't believe they said that they're going to be completely out of legislative issues. Quite the contrary. They do have a legislative committee, and they still will be involved. It's just the way they can lobby. You know, they can't have a lobbyist on staff and stuff like that. So they still will be involved. But yes, if they were to change the 501c3 status to something else, they could be more politically involved. I thought it was a great conference. Not quite as good as Santa Barbara. Well, I think we still hold the title for the best conference ever, but there was some substantive information that was provided there, and I did take a lot back from. I am a believer in the getting the word out and branding. I've been involved in other organizations where we've been actively involved in rebranding and branding organization, and the importance of that you don't see until something bad happens. And if you have put yourself in front of the news before the news happens, then you're more apt to have advocates for you, and that more people will understand what your entity is and what it does. And it certainly is something that we need to have a little powwow and talk about just how we're going to do that, if we even want to. I do.
Commissioner Waterfield, how was your first experience?
Well, I don't want to be redundant with everybody else, but it was great. I had a good time and got to know a few of my colleagues, and I really enjoyed the days over there. So I wish I could have known what last year's event was all about, but this year's was good. Thank you.
All right. Well, just a few comments from me.
Mr. Chair?
Who's Mr. Levin?
That was me.
Go ahead.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I appreciate the folks that are asking for rebranding and the man on the street. You know, if you go out and ask the man on the street, they don't know who the vice president is either, but that doesn't mean we change our system. So I am totally opposed to, and I hope we bring it back for a future item. We don't have customer. I mean, I don't see this as rebranding, trying to go out and get new customers or something. This is a very small niche. If you ask other members of the Board of Supervisors who haven't served on LAFCO, they don't know what it is either, but they don't need to know. So, I mean, I think this is maybe a discussion that we need to have at a future time if people want to spend money on rebranding and websites. And I can't imagine somebody sitting at home trying to figure out, looking for the LAFCO website. I'm not really sure how many hits you're going to get on that sucker, but it's something I just think is totally out of our purview and would not want to spend any money moving forward on something like that.
Okay. I think one of the things that came out with the rebranding was the importance of letting our legislatures know why LAFCOs were formed. One of the things, and Mr. Lebanon, you'll like this, when they did the Man About Town, one person's response was they thought LAFCO was a comedy club. So I thought you'd like that. One other thing interesting in the fiscal class. I'm sorry. No, it was one. It was one. No. It was a member on the street. When they did the man on the street interviews, one of them said they thought this was a comedy club. That's what LAFCO, comedy club. Anyway, one interesting thing I took away from the fiscal class was that there's many LAFCO commissions that are now including the unfunded liabilities in their MSRs. So be able to show the sustainability of the various districts and looking at their financials. So, you know, as we do MSRs, that may be something that we want to consider in the future, especially in the area of the unfunded liabilities. Mr. Hood was incorrect on the power plant. It was him that asked me to go up the 6th flight of stairs. And that was a long climb, but I took the elevator down. The interesting thing about that power plant is it is already partially decommissioned. They're soon to be fully decommissioned, and that they're going to clean that area up, and that whole property is going to the city, and I can't remember what city it is, but they're going to get this beachfront property that's absolutely beautiful. They still are going to provide the energy, but with a new power plant, because I think they serve 750,000 people out of that power plant, which is significant. The desal plant, my takeaway was from there was it served just a small portion of San Diego because they don't have groundwater support. It's all imported. And it's such a small amount, but it's very expensive. Desal is very expensive, and it was pretty tasty. They gave us some of the water while we were there. I needed it after that 6th flight of stairs. And they did cover the Little Hoover Commission. So I think it was well done. They did a really good job. So it was good to attend. I'm sorry that some missed. Hopefully you'll go next year. Next year it'll be in Yosemite. So keep that in mind. Okay, let's move on. Let's go to information item number 2.
Chair Seves and members of the Commission, informational item number 2 is to receive and file a report on the municipal services reviews and sphere of influence updates.
Mr. Hood.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an update, basically, an informational item that I have reinitiated 3 municipal service reviews, sphere of influence updates that I sent out letters to the agencies last year, and I have heard from a couple of them in Montecito and haven't heard from the Carpinteria Valley Water District. But I did also send out letters to update spheres of influence with several other special districts: Coyama RCD, Casmalia Community Services District, Coyama Community Services District, Coyama Valley Rec and Park Districts, and Embarcadero Municipal Improvement District, Isla Vista Rec and Park District. Heard from Rodney Gould, and so he's preparing the response. Lompoc Valley Medical Center, Los Alamos Community Services District, Mission Hills CSD, and the Mosquito and Vector Management District. So I'll be bringing those back to you in the next month or two. And we're moving ahead with the updates as we're required to do. And we have a new proposed district in San Antonio, groundwater basin district, that a couple of these districts overlap that district. So I wanted to make sure that we're current on the Coyama Resource Conservation District and the Los Alamos CSD, because they do overlap that new district that's being formed and is in the process of forming. And so that's just an update, and that's all I had.
Any questions for Mr. Geyer?
Yeah, I have one. Okay.
Yeah.
Montecito Water, I was under the impression that they had contacted you.
They did contact me. Well, yeah, I sent them a letter. I have not received a response, to be honest with you. I was confusing that with the fire district. Chip Hickman called me yesterday, but I haven't heard from the Montecito Water District as far as I can recall.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, any other questions from Mr. Hood? Okay, seeing none, we'll file. And do we have any commissioner announcements or requests for future agenda items?
Yeah, just one. You know, I kind of blanked out a little bit when we were doing the meeting dates and locations, going back to that. The last time I checked, January 5th and February 2nd are Friday in 2018. So we may want to make a correction. Maybe I'm missing it. I don't know. Can you check?
Let's check on that. Fridays, so we'll move it to Thursday. I thought it was pretty up to date, so let's move it to the preceding Thursday.
So since
Yeah,
we
bring it
voted
back
on it, we'll
next
have to bring
month.
it back, but change January 5th to the 4th in
Okay, let's,
February.
since it was voted unanimously, let's just recall that item and let's make a change now. We can recall it. We're in the same meeting.
I'll make a motion that we reconsider that item.
Okay. So moved and second to reconsider the calendar. So we're going to need a roll call vote.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, we should read the item to the record, just so we're clear for the public.
Chair Seves, members of the commission, consent calendar item number two is to approve the 2018 Santa Barbara LAFCO regular schedule of meeting dates and locations.
Okay, and we have a motion and a second to do that.
Second.
So we'll need a roll call vote to reconsider it.
Commissioner Guyer?
Aye.
Commissioner Lavanino?
Aye.
Commissioner Morehouse? Commissioner Richardson? Commissioner Welch? Commissioner Wolf?
Aye.
Chair Seves?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion
Go ahead.
that we change the meeting dates that was noted in our agenda for today for 2018. Two changes. The January 5th date becomes January 4th, and the February 2nd date becomes February 1st. All others remain the same.
Okay, February 1st instead of the 2nd.
I'll second.
Mr. Chair, just to slow down here, our clerk might have a correction she wants to forward. Are we good?
Chair Seves, members of the commission, it appears that July as well should be July 12th, which is the following week. As noted on the schedule, it's delayed 1 week for the 4th of July holiday.
Yes.
I'll modify my motion to make that change from July 13th to the 12th.
And
Okay,
second.
Okay, so just to, January 1st is being changed to, 5th is being changed to the 4th.
Mm-hmm.
February 2nd is being changed to the 1st. And July 13th is being changed to the 12th.
Correct.
Are there any other changes? We have a motion and a second roll call vote to approve the changes.
Commissioner Guyer?
Aye.
Commissioner Lavanino?
Aye.
Commissioner Morehouse?
Aye.
Commissioner Richardson? Commissioner Welch? Commissioner Wolf?
Aye.
Chair Seves?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you for catching that. Okay, any other commissioner announcements or future agenda items? None. Mr. Hood, Executive Officer's comments.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to inform the commission that I do have a 2018 calendar on my desk at home, so just didn't look at it closely enough. Thank you.
Next time consult it. Okay.
We did, just one quick question, comment. We did invite Little Hoover Commission Chairman Pedro Nava to attend this meeting today, and he declined. He had a scheduling conflict. And I also sent out a list of Cal LAFCO legislation that was handed out at the legislative session at the conference last week for your information. There's about 5 or 6 bills that are summarized and were signed during the session, so those are my only 2 comments.
Mr. Hood, on the December 7th meeting, does it look we have enough items for that meeting?
At present, we don't have anything pending for the December meeting, but if we're thinking of canceling it, if you agree, I'd prefer to wait for a week or 2 to see if anything comes up, but it looks like December may be a candidate for cancellation.
Okay, I'd like to know at least 2 weeks in advance so we can cancel it. Right now, we're tentatively scheduled then to have our next LAFCO meeting Thursday, December 7th in Santa Maria. I wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving, and I'll let you know about December. We're adjourned.